let's make a machine. And let's take a look at custom block entities. Alright, we find ourselves back in Telegram more, and in this tutorial we're going to be adding a custom block entity to our mod right here for Forge 120.1. Very important that that is the case. And yeah, let's just jump right in. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a custom block. Now, a block entity, right, just to give a brief overview, so to speak, is basically like a furnace or like a custom furnace or a custom machine that you might have seen in other mods, right? Like a macerator or something like that, where we basically have a custom GUI that we can open and it's going to do all sorts of crazy things. So in this case, we need a custom block for this that we can right click, and that's going to open a screen. Now, as you can clearly see by the length of this video, it is a quite extensive topic. Sadly, because all of the classes are crazily intertwined, there really is no easy way to stop at a certain point and then take a look at everything that we've done. So this is going to be a lot. However, all of the code, as always, as well as all of the resources and everything that you might need, is linked in the description below. So you can basically take a look at that. And let's start with the custom block over here. That's going to be the gem polishing station block. There we go. And this will extend the base entity block right here. Base entity block. There you go. We're going to hover over this and implement the method. This is the new block entity method. Hover over this again, create constructor, and batching super. Now, the first thing we realize is that we don't have any block entities, which is why we're going to create a deliberate error right here. This is just so that I don't forget to add this, because it's very, very easy to forget to add something like this. And when it comes to the actual block itself, it's going to be a custom block model, and it's going to look kind of like this. So this is our custom block model right here, you know, with a little tray where we can basically put the item in, so to speak, quote unquote, and that is how it looks. Now, what you will see is that, well, while it is, you know, in terms of width and length, it's sort of the size of a block, not really in terms of height, right? So a normal block would be 16, right, by 16 by 16. So that would be this height, and you can see that is not as high, and that is rather a height of 12. And what we can do is, when you hover over this particular block, right, we actually only want the shape to be including the 12 height. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add a custom voxel shape. So this is going to be a public static final voxel shape. I'm going to call this the shape right here. And this is equal to block.box. And then this from 0, 0, 0. So from the origin to 16, because of course it's an X length 16, a height of 12. So this is Y12, and then Z 16 again. We're also going to make sure that the constructor here is public, and then to use the shape, we just want to overwrite the get shape method over here, this one right here, that it has a strike through. That's totally fine. Anything that has strike through in the block class can be overridden, no worries at all. You should just not call it. And with that, we also have the shape properly done. That's pretty cool. And then there's one more thing that we can do already, and that is the get render shape method right here. And this is extremely important that we override this, and we want to return render shape.model. If you do not do this, then your block entity is going to be invisible. That's of course not something that you want, so make sure to override the get render shape method and return here render shape.model. There's a couple more methods that we need to overwrite, but for the time being, we first of all want to register the block, because we don't have access to everything that we actually need. This is what I mean by saying we have to run around this a couple of times. For this, I'm just going to copy over the trapdoor right here. So any type of block that we've already registered, and this is then the gem underscore polishing underscore station, and same with the name, of course, changing this to gem polishing underscore station right here. This is not a trapdoor block, but a gem polishing station block. Copying the iron, that's fine. The sound here is not going to be changed. No occlusion will actually be included, but no block set type needed. And with that, the block here is done. And let's actually just finish the entirety of the block itself. Let's jump into the data gen first and foremost. Of course, this is just going to drop itself when you mine it. So there's nothing really interesting going on here, to be honest. But the block state provider is going to be a little more interesting, because this is going to be a simple block. In this case, we want to actually choose the simple block with model. So that is actually a already prepared. So this is an already existing method right here. And this is going to be modblocks.gempolishing.get, a new model file unchecked model file with a mod log of block/gem underscore polishing underscore station. And with that, we have this done as well, and we are actually good to go. Just need to add the translation and the block model. We'll see that in just a second. Translation, of course, pretty straightforward. And the block model, well, that one is actually quite interesting. The reason why we need to add the block model ourselves is because it's a JSON file here in this case that is exported from Blockbench, because of course this is a completely custom 3D model right here, so obviously we can't just generate that. That would be a little bit crazy. And for that we have a texture under the block over here as called, as you can see, Gem Polishing Station texture. So let's add that as well. There we go. And just to get everything completely done in the textures folder, we can also add the GUI folder or GUI folder. And there we can also add the GUI right here. I can show you this. So it basically looks like this. This is basically the GUI that we wanted to have open when you right click the block. And then you can, put an item in here and it's going to progress over here. And then it's going to give you an item, an output right there. With that done, we can then jump into the block entity. So in our block package, we're going to make a new package called entity. And inside of there, we'll need a class called mod block entities. Inside of the entities, again, we want to make the Gem Polishing Station block entity class. There you go. Quite a mouthful, but that is going to be okay. And this one is going to be very interesting. This will extend the block entity class over here, as well as implements the menu provider interface. We're going to hover over this and implement the methods. Hover over this again, create constructor, matching super, and there we go. And now we're off to the races. So what a block entity in general represents is a block with additional data that can be saved automatically, as well as some tick functionality. So basically this is, you can basically add some logic to your block that extends it a little bit more than just a normal block, let's say. And highly recommended is you click on the block entity, press Ctrl H, and you can basically take a look at all of the vanilla block entities, such as, for example, in the base container block entity right here, I believe in the abstract furnace block. So you can see, you can take at the abstract furnace block or the furnace block entity, although the furnace itself does not look very interesting. However, the abstract furnace block, you can see there are things like the container data. There's some integers, there's some items over here. There's even a get fuel map and also a load method and add method and a server tick method, quite important and quite interesting. So there are a bunch of things that you can basically take a look at and learn on how vanilla does certain things. Now here in this case, we're just going to make a custom one, right, and basically have a custom logic to it, but it is all similarly related. The first thing we will need is a private final item stack handler. We're going to call this the item handler, and this is basically going to be our inventory. This is a new item stack handler with size 2. I'll explain that in just a second. Let's first of all do it like this. We don't need a anonymous class just yet of it, but that is the item stack handler, basically our inventory, and the size 2 is of course because, well, our custom GUI over here has 2 different slots, and that's basically represented with the 2 right there. What I highly recommend you do is you make some private static final int called input slot equal to 0, and then, for example, just duplicate it for output slot 1. That just makes it so much easier to know that this is slot of index 0 and this is slot of index 1. So you can basically just always type, item handler.get input slot or output slot. That just makes it way easier. And then to deal with this in Forge, we also want to make a private lazy optional of type item handler. We're going to call this the lazy item handler. It's going to be equal to a lazy optional dot empty. And there we go. This is then used in the following methods. So we want to override a couple of methods. The first one is the get capability method with the direction. Very important. We also want to override the onload method. This one right here. And then also the invalidate caps method. So capabilities are a way in Forge to basically have other mods or, the game know, okay, this block entity has a certain capability, and we're basically going to check for that. So if cap equals Forge capabilities dot item handler, then I simply want to return the lazy item handler dot cast, calling the method right there, and else I'm going to call the get capability right here. The super for the get capability, there you go. On the onload method, we want to say lazy item handler is equal to a lazy optional dot of, and then a supplier of the item handler that we've created at the very top. There you go. And then on the invalidate caps, lazy item handler dot invalidate. There you go. And that is going to be fine. So this is all Forge specific things so that the block entity actually can deal with items basically coming in from the outside and things like that. A couple more things that we want to do is we want to make a protected final container data right here called data. And then this is going to save and synchronize two integers. The first integer is going to be the progress equal to 0, and the other one is going to be the max progress, which is going to be equal to 78 here in this example. So progress, of course, being that every tick, we're going to make it so that the progress is going to increase if we have a recipe inside of it, right? So if a specific item is here, then the progress will increase, right? The arrow is going to, come down over here, and once it's finished, we're going to have a new item. We're going to craft a new item, and that is going to be basically when progress is at least max progress, and we need to make sure that this is properly synchronized. So in the constructor, first of all, what we can do is we can remove the first parameter, quite important as well. We can remove it here as well. This is going to lead to an error, but we're going to fix that in a moment when we register everything. But the second thing we want to do here then is this data is equal to a new container data. And this is going to create an anonymous class over here. Once again, ending it with a semicolon right here. And we want to return some switches. So this is going to return a switch right here of the p index, and it's going to look like this. Case 0 is basically just going to get gem polishing station block entity .progress, and then you can just duplicate it by pressing Ctrl D, and the one is going to get you max progress, and the default case is just going to return 0. You also need to end this with a semicolon. A similar thing happens in the set actually, where you just make a switch for the p index again. And then case 0 is going to do the following: gem polishing station block entity .progress equal to the p value right here. Duplicate that, and then in case 1, we want to set the max progress. Now, the reason why we need the container data is so that it properly synchronizes the progress as well as the max progress via the server and the client. Otherwise, the client actually does not know what the progress is, and we will need to know this when we actually draw the arrow in just a bit inside of the screen. So that is why we need this specific container data over here, and that is what it does. The reason why you have 2 over here is, of course, because we have 2 integers that we're synchronizing. So if you had a third, for example, then you would also add that here and then have an integer of 3 for the count. We can then make a new method, public void drops. In this case, that is just a helper method that is going to make it easier for us to know what is going to drop here. This is going to be the simple container equal to, or called inventory, equal to a new simple container. Item handler dot get slots. This is going to get us the number of slots inside of this inventory. Then for int I is equal to 0, I is smaller than item handler dot get slots I plus plus. So we're basically going through the item handler and setting the item inside of the simple container over here in the index I to item handler dot get stack and slot I over here. So we're just basically copying this, and then we're going to say containers dot drop contents this dot level this world position, and then passing in the simple container right here, and that is going to be called in just a second in the block itself. But that is actually quite important that we have this. In the display name, we can simply say component.translatable, and the key, funnily enough, we can actually literally just copy this one because gem polishing station is exactly what I wanted to display it there. So that's going to be the translatable key. For the menu, we don't have that yet, so we have to make a deliberate error right here. And then we almost get to the logic. The one last thing we want is the save additional method as well as the load method. So the save additional as well as the load method, you can see it has a compound tag associated with it. And those are needed to save the data when the game is saved and to load the data when the game is loaded. So in the save additional, we can just say ptag dot we want to put in the inventory. So this is going to be called inventory, item handler dot serialize nbt, and that is going to make it so that everything, like all of our items inside of this block entity, are going to be saved, and we're going to read them in just a second. But we also want to put in integer in, and that is the gem underscore polishing underscore station dot progress. Just make sure that the key over here is unique. Then we're going to save the progress, and then similarly in the load here, we're just going to say item handler dot deserialize nbt, passing in the ptag dot get compound, and the compound we're getting is the inventory because that has to be the same key that we saved it with. And similarly in the progress, we're going to set that equal to ptag dot get int, and the integer we're going to get is this one right here. So with the key gem underscore polishing underscore station dot progress, basically reading that out. Right, so what a crazy class over here already, and we're going to continue with the logic in just a second. Right, so first of all, we're going to now register the block entity, and then we can finish the block. Like I said, it is pretty freaking crazy, but it is what it is. So this is going to be a public static final deferred register. We've seen this plenty of times now. Block entity type here, in this case of type question mark, called block underscore entities equal to a deferred register.create forge registries dot block entity types, and then tutorial mod.mod ID. Then we're going to make a public static void register method with an event bus called event bus. I'm going to call block entities.register, passing in the event bus right here, and there we go. Let's immediately call the register method in the tutorial mod class constructor. So this is the mod block entities.register, passing in the mod event bus right here. So that is handled, and then it's going to get pretty crazy. Now, as I've said, all of the code is, of course, available to you in the description below, so you can basically take a look at that. And this is going to be a registry object of block entity type of type gem polishing station block entity. This is the gem underscore polishing underscore BE. Let's say that is a easy name to use. Block entities.register, and this is the gem polishing underscore BE again. This is then a supplier of block entity type dot builder dot of gem polishing station block entity : new. After the new, comma, mod blocks dot gem polishing station dot get. After the second closing parenthesis, build, passing in a null, and no errors should be present. Once again, you can compare this in the GitHub repository, and we can now fix the error right here. So this is going to be mod block entities dot gem polishing be dot get. So that error is fixed, and we can now go to back to the block again and actually finish the entire block class as well. In the new block entity, we want to return a new gem polishing station block entity, passing in the position and the state. But we also need to override a few more methods. And that is going to be the onRemove method. We also want to override the use method, and then lastly, we want to override the getTicker method right here. There you go. Those are going to be the different methods to overwrite. Now, the contents of those I will actually be copying over because they are pretty much almost always the same. So you can see in the onRemove method right here, we're basically just checking, hey, does the new state over here, right, is this no longer the same state? And if this is the case, and the previous state was the gem polishing station block entity, then we're just going to drop all of the inventory. That's basically what the onRemove method does. The use method similarly looks kind of like this. Basically, if we're not on the client, what we want to do is we want to open a screen right here. Note, please, that the network hooks open screen only work in 120.1. If you're trying to follow this with 120.2, this will not work. I repeat, this will not work with 120.2. So just keep that in mind, that that is a limitation right here. But usually this is how it's going to be for 120.1 and even previous versions. This is how it's going to look like. And then lastly, in the getTicker method, this is basically where we are going to define a tick method that is going to be called in our block entity, well, every tick. So basically 20 times a second. The first thing we're going to ask here is pLevel.is client side. And if this is the case, then we're going to return a null right here. But if that's not the case, then we want to return the createTickerHelper method, passing in pBlock entity type mod block entities dot gem polishing station be dot get. And then we want to start typing in pLevel, and you can see that it suggests this to us. We're going to press the tab key to autocomplete, then say pBlock entity dot tick, and then passing in pLevel1, passing in pPause, and then passing in pState1 as well. Now, the tick is going to be red. That's totally fine because we can hover over this and create the tick method inside of our gem polishing station block entity. We're just going to rename those to pLevel and pState. And now we have the tick method inside of our block entity, which is going to basically be the entire logic for our crafting. So let's add the logic for the crafting. I'm going to do this by writing out methods that I have not created yet so that you hopefully understand the logic, and then the methods implementing those is actually going to be a rather easy thing. So first of all, we're going to ask, hey, has recipe? So if we have a recipe, then we're going to continue. What do we want to do if we have detected a recipe? Well, we want to increase the crafting progress. That makes a lot of sense, right? That's what we want to do. We also want to set changed over here with the level, the position, and the state. So this is going to be pLevel, pPause, and pState. That's quite important that we call this. Basically, this just makes sure that any changes are noted, so to speak. And then we want to say, well, wait a second. Now we're increasing the crafting process. When are we finished? Exactly. Has progress finished? If this is the case, then we want to craft item, right? Because that's the moment when we want to craft the item. But we also then want to reset the progress back to its original progress right here. And a similar thing happens when we no longer have a recipe. Then we just want to also reset progress. So hopefully the logic sort of makes sense, right? Where if we have a recipe, then we're going to increase the crafting process. And then once the progress has finished, we're then going to craft the recipe. We're going to reset it. And if it still has a recipe, we're going to continue to go through this. The tick method, as I said, is called 20 times a second. So that is basically how this is going to work. And now we need to implement all of those methods. So let's hover over this and create each of those different methods over here. Crafting finished, crafting the item here, and resetting the progress. Some of them are easier than others. So for example, the reset progress method is literally just going to be progress equals to 0 because that is going to be resetting the progress. Similar thing is has progress finished is just going to return is progress bigger or equal to max progress. And increasing the crafting progress is also just progress plus plus. Now you can say, well, couldn't I just write progress plus plus inside of the tick method? Absolutely, you could. You can do the same thing with the has progress finished. However, if you look at this, for example, right, just for a sake of argument right here, this is a good thing. This is a good thing in programming. If you read this, okay, progress is bigger or equal to max progress. Oh, this is when the progress is finished. Sure, but that's going to take you, like 2 seconds to figure out versus if you read has progress finished, you immediately know what that means. Highly recommended to use the writing methods out that don't exist yet method to basically just get the logic right and then do everything that you need inside of the methods because they don't really cost anything in terms of what you're doing. And then this leaves us the craft item as well as the has recipe methods. Now, this is quite important. So in this tutorial, we are going to hard code it in so that when you put in a raw sapphire right here, then you get a normal sapphire out. That is going to be hard coded right now. And in the next tutorial, we're going to make a custom recipe type where you can actually make custom JSON files and you can do multiple ones. So please do know that this is not necessarily the best way to do it. This is just one way to get it to work because the whole recipe type is another thing. And then this tutorial would end up being like 1.5 hours long, and that doesn't really need to be the case. So in the has recipe, we're going to make a boolean. We're going to call this the has crafting item, and this is going to ask this dot item handler, and we're going to get the stack in slot input slot, right? If that item get item is equal to mod items dot raw underscore sapphire dot get. If this is the case, we can actually return this to say, hey, this is true. However, we also want to make sure that we can actually insert result right here, right? So yes, we could just say has crafting item in here, bam, be done. But then you think up to yourself, well, wait a second. Let's say we have 64 sapphires right here. What's going to happen then? Exactly. So how about we check for that as well? So the item stack that we're going to get, right? So this is going to be our result. This is going to be the item stack result. It's going to be equal to a new item stack of mod items dot sapphire dot get right here. This is going to be 1. And what we can ask is can insert amount into output slot, passing in result dot get count. Fair enough. And we can also ask can insert item into output slot, passing in result dot get item. Those are 2 other helper methods. So we can hover over this again, create that method, and here again, create that method. Now can insert the item, fairly straightforward. We're just going to say, well, we're going to return this item handler dot get stack in slots output slot, right? If it is empty, then of course you can just put it in there, no worries at all. Or if the same item is already in there, so we can say get stack in slots output slot dot is, and then passing in the item parameter. So we can only insert this item if either the output slot is empty, which means it can basically receive any item, or if the item inside of the input slot is already the item that we're trying to insert. But that, of course, only works if the count here is correct, and the count is going to be the following. If the stack inside of the output slot, right, and we're going to get the count of this, right, if that plus the count that we want to add is smaller or equal to the max count, right? So this is going to be this dot item handler dot get stack in slot output slot dot get max stack size, right? If that is the case, then we are good to go and we can insert, because then we know that this is at most 64. Or for example, if your output item would be signs, right, then the get max stack size would actually change, so that would be 16, right? So that is why this is a general way of doing it, and we're asking it generally and not just saying if it's bigger or equal to 64, because that's not always the max stack size of any particular item. So that is the logic of the has recipe method. And then in the craft item method, this is where actually things happen. So this is going to be the item stack result over here. is going to be a new item stack of moditems.sapphire.get. And we're going to get one of those. And then we're going to remove something from the item handler. This is extract item from the input slot. We're going to extract one, and this is not a simulation. And after extracting it, we then also want to set something in the output slot. And the thing we're going to set is this.itemhandler.set stack in slot, output slot. We're going to make a new item stack over here with result.getItem. We will then get the current number of items in the output slot, get stack in slot, output slot.getCount plus result.getCount. The reason I'm doing it like this is basically that either it's going to be, the get count right here is 0, so then this is just going to add the count right here, or if this is not 0, then it's just going to add 1 to it. So that is all that we need to do here. And then this is the entire logic done for the block entity. But sadly, of course, we're not done quite just yet because that would be too easy. We still have to create a menu right here. So this is going to be a menu as well as a screen. This is responsible for placing down the slots as well as dealing with basically the interactions from the client's perspective. For this, in the tutorial mod package, we're going to make a new package called screen. Instead of there, we need 3 classes. The first one is the mod menu types. There you go. The second one is going to be the gem polishing station menu. And then last but certainly not least is the gem polishing station screen. Let's close a bunch of these classes over here, and we're going to start with the screen as it is actually the easier of all of the classes that we still need to make. This will extend the abstract container screen right here of gem polishing station menu. We're going to hover over this and implement the render BG method. Hover over this again, create constructor matching super. The error right here is totally fine because we have not yet implemented the station menu, so we're going to do that in just a second. But first of all, we're going to add a private static final resource location called texture equal to a new resource location tutorial mod.modID, and this is under textures /GUI/gem _polishing _station GUI.png, and there we go. That's quite important. Now, here we can override a couple of methods. The first one is going to be the init method, and that is going to be interesting indeed. So if we have our GUI open our GUI, you can see there's very little space right here and right here, where usually, right, it says the name of the block entity right here, and then it says inventory right here. Now you can keep it like that. You can, of course, change the GUI texture as well, but in my case, I just want to get rid of both labels. You can do this in the init method by saying this.inventory label y is equal to something like 10,000, and then it's definitely going to be gone. Similar to the title label y to like 10,000, and then this is gone. So basically, this is going to be the inventory label written right here, inventory, and then title label is written right here. And basically, you can change that, and it is as easy as just changing the y and the x values if you want to, for example, move them. Now for the rest of the class, I will just copy over the contents of this. Once again, as always, this is available to you in the description below in the GitHub repository, so no worries at all. The render BG method, you can see the first 3 or 5 lines over here are very generic stuff. So we're just setting the shader, the color to basically just be normal, and then the texture to our texture right here that we have defined right there. And then we're getting the X and Y values so that we know where we are on the screen. And then we're using the GUI graphics.blit method to actually draw this texture in the middle of the screen. That's what this does. And here we're also having a render progress arrow. You can see that we're using the isCrafting and the getScaleProgress methods that don't exist just yet. We will do those in just a second in the custom menu, right, in the gem polishing station menu. But the GUI graphics.blit is a little more interesting right now. So I'm going to explain the blit method over here, which is a it's a hard to understand method at the first glance. But then once you understand it, you're like, oh, this makes perfect sense. So here we define as a first thing the texture that we're going to draw. So in the render progress arrow, we're going to draw this texture. You can see this is the texture, right? And that is what we're going to draw. Now, where are we going to draw it? We're going to draw it 85 pixels in the X direction and 30 pixels in the Y direction. Where would this be? Well, 85 pixels is right around here and 30 pixels down is right around here. Oh, look at this. This is where we were going to start drawing something. But the question is, what are we drawing? I just said the entire texture, but wait a second. No. The offset of the texture that we're drawing is 176 pixels. So to X value, and 0 in the Y value. So that means 176 pixels. Oh, look at that. We're exactly outside of here, exactly where the arrow is. Now, what is the size of the arrow that we're drawing? Well, it is a width of 8, so basically 8 pixels wide. But how high are we drawing? We're drawing based on the scaled progress of our block entity. Basically meaning if we have 50% of the progress done in crafting, we're going to draw 50% of the arrow right here. That is all we're doing. That is what this is. So if, for example, you have an arrow that goes from left to right, then you would just switch the scale progress to be the width instead of the height. That's all that there's to it. I highly recommend you play around with this a little bit, because while I explained it hopefully pretty well over here, this is an important thing that you need to just try out a bunch of numbers and see what then happens, because otherwise it's very, very hard to fully understand this. And then we also wanted to override the render method over here just to render the background as well as the tooltips. That's just a thing that's quite important. Otherwise, tooltips are missing and all that, and you don't want that to happen. Also, I call this the screened, which is not quite right. This should be the screen. There you go. Absolutely no worries. And we can now jump into the menu, which is another one of those classes that's a little bit more complicated, sadly. So this will extend the abstract container menu right here. We're going to hover over this and implement the quick move stack method as well as the isValid method. Hover over this create constructor matching super. And in this case, it's going to be, well, it's going to be sort of defunct anyway, because we need to do all sorts of different things. The first one is we want to make a public final gem polishing station block entity. We're going to call this the block entity. We're then going to have a private final level. This is from, quite important, net Minecraft world level. Make sure to choose the correct one, called level. And then a private final container data called data. We will then have two different constructors. The first one is the gem polishing station menu with an int key container ID, with an inventory called inv, and a friendly by the buff called extra data. We're going to call this key container ID inf.player.level.getBlockEntity, passing in extra data.read block pause. After the second closing parenthesis, new simple container data with a 2 right here, and that is going to be fine. We'll then create that constructor, so public gem polishing menu, passing it int p container ID, inventory inv, block entity, container data, and there we go. The error in the first constructor should go away. We can call the super, first parameter empty, second container data. And then there's a couple of things to do. First of all, we want to check container size. We want to pass in the inv, the inventory, and it should be a size of 2. We then want to say block entity is equal to the entity.cast, casting this to a gem polishing station block entity. We then can say this.level equal to inv.player.level. This.data is equal to data. Now, what's very important here is that the inventory right here is the player inventory, while the entity right here is basically, well, the entity's inventory, so to speak, or the block entity. Now, for this, we need a couple of helper methods that I'm going to copy over, because we now need to initialize the slots. And the slots are basically all of the slots that we can interact with inside of our inventory. Those are, of course, these two, but they are also the inventory as well as the hotbar, which are basically going to be, very similar all the time. So that's going to be the add player inventory and the add player hotbar methods right here, customly written with already the correct indices and the correct locations. Highly recommended if you need to change this, because maybe your GUI is a different size, then you can just play around with those numbers over here, basically where this is placed in the Y location and the X locations. So that also works totally fine. And we can then call this right here. This would be the add player inventory, passing in the inventory, and then here add player hotbar, passing in inv inventory as well. At the bottom here, we want to call add data slots, passing in the data. That's going to be fine. And then here we can call this.blockEntity.getCapability. We want to get the forge capabilities of item handler. And then we want to call if present item handler. And what we want to do is we want to then add slots. This.addSlot, making a new slot item handler, passing in the item handler right here from the consumer with index 0 at position 80 and 11. And we can duplicate this with index 1 at position 80 and 59 right here. Now, where do those numbers come from? What is this? Well, these are the slots that we have right here. those are basically at position 80 and 11 and at 80 and 59. That's the general idea, and that is basically where those numbers come from, and that's quite important to add. I believe that for the rest, I'm pretty much going to copy this over once again. This is a lot of things that we're copying over, but most of the stuff is basically going to be the same with like 1 or 2 little tiny changes. The first thing is the isCrafting and the getScaleProgress methods, which are very straightforward actually. Crafting is just saying, hey, is the data, of 0, like bigger than 0? This just means that the progress is more than it is, because the data right here, right, the container data that we're passing in is the same container data that we've created in the block entity right here at the top, right, where 0 is progress and max progress is 1. And that is basically what we're referring to both here and in the getScaleProgress. You can see we have a progress and a max progress. And based on the ratio between those two, we're basically showing a different size of the arrow, which is 26 here. In this case, that's the height of the arrow in pixels. And that is all that there is to it, basically. For the still valid method, that is as easy as just calling the still valid method right here and passing in container level access dot create, passing in level, passing in block entity dot get block pass. After the second closing parentheses, you want to say p player, and then mod blocks dot gem polishing station dot get. That is as easy as saying that. However, the quick move stack method is always a delight for me because it is absolutely horrendous. I will be copying the entire thing over, and I would say to you, just copy it over. Thank the Lord that someone has made this, because as you can see, it is an absolute wreck of a method. This method is responsible for shift clicking items in and out of your block entity. So that's fine. However, because it is dependent on all of these different things, it is an absolute mess. We could go through this in half an hour and I could explain it, but to me, it just does not make any sense. The only thing you need to do, you can see this, you have to define how many slots are in your custom block entity. In our case, this is 2. If you had like 18 more, then you would have to put in 20, I guess, right? So this has to be the exact count of how many slots you have. You have to define this, and once you define this, the rest is just going to take care of it. This is all done by DZM07. Thank so much that they have done this and basically made it open source, because otherwise we would be crazy. I'm just going to close this method because it is an absolute wreck and I don't like it. And it just is what it is, but that's going to calculate all of that for you. So let's then register this menu in the mod menu types right here. So this is going to be a similar thing that we've seen. So there's a public static final deferred register of type menu type of type question mark called menus equal to a deferred register dot create forge registries dot menu types tutorial mod dot mod id, and of course a public static void register method with an event bus called event bus right here, menus.register, passing in the event bus, and let's immediately call this as well. This is going to be the mod menu types.register, passing in the event bus. There you go. For this, we need a helper method. This is going to be a private static, and then angled bracket t extends abstract container menu, then returning a registry object of type menu type of type t, register menu types, with a string name parameter as well as a iContainer factory of type T. I'm going to call this the factory right here. And this is going to return menus.register, passing in the name as well as a supplier of iForge menu type create, passing in the factory right there. And that should be good to go. And then we can make a public static final registry object of type menu type of type gem polishing station menu, gem underscore polishing underscore menu equal to the register menu types method over here, gem underscore polishing underscore menu. That's going to be fine. And then here it's going to be the gem polishing menu colon new. No errors should be present. We can now go to the menu itself in the second constructor, say mod menu types dot gem polishing station menu dot get. Now no more errors present here. We can jump to the block entity, and instead of there in the create menu method, we can now finally create the new menu right here, passing in the p container, the inventory, then this, and then this dot data. Once again, no more errors should be present, and we should be pretty much good to go. We now just need to connect the screen and the menu. You can actually double check this. The screen here is grayed out, so it has not been used. So we want to use that in the tutorial mod class over here under the client mod events. We want to say menu screens dot register mod menu types gem polishing station menu.get, and then gem polishing station screen : new. No errors present here, and we can breathe a sigh of relief because we are pretty much done. Let's just add the block here to the creative mode tab so that we have this. Tiny addendum, we want to make this a simple block with item over here. Otherwise, the item model is not actually generated. So we can rerun the data over here. And then it's also going to generate the item model because here it has just created the block.json file, which is fine. But then here it has also created the item model JSON file. Absolutely fantastic. And we can now finally jump in and craft some stuff with our custom block entity. All right, find ourselves back in Minecraft, and as you can see, the gem polishing station has been added. If I right-click it, you can see it opens and everything is in here, and I can even insert things into the slot right here. I can even insert things into this slot, and if I put in raw sapphire, you can see, wham, we're going to progress over here, and once we reach the progress, we have a sapphire in the output slot, and it continues, of course, if I, just like, just doing some other stuff, I go back, oh, look at this, we already have 3 sapphires. Absolutely freaking fantastic. This is the custom block entity. Absolutely awesome. And what's even more awesome is in this video, we'll make a custom recipe type for our block entity. Hope to see you there. So, yeah.